The following is a special presentation of the Decibel Geek Podcast. This is the Decibel Geek Podcast with Aaron Camaro and Chris Sinzak.
Dun, 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 dun. And welcome to the Decibel Geek Podcast. My name is Eric Camaro, joined as always by my good friend Chris Sinzak, and we're ready to bring you 1981 Part 2.
I'm going to forget you just did that.
You can forget it for now, but you know it's coming back up later.
I know. All right, we ready to jump into July on for 1981?
All right, second part of the year. Here we go.
All right.
So what do you got? You got some more prices for us?
Yeah. The cost of an IBM personal computer was a cheap $1,565 in 1981.
Wow.
Jesus. As you heard in the commercial last week, a video disc player, which you can't even get anymore, was $500 at the time.
Oh, man, the poor people that bought those.
And the thing that would make you the envy of your entire neighborhood, the Atari 2600 was $130 and games were $25.
I know, that's wild to think back how expensive that was. And you think about, the sacrifices your parents may have made to, get you something like that. I had the Atari 2600 and a handful of games, and then I look back and realize, wow, that was a lot of money, and then think, well, back in 81, that was really a lot of money.
It was.
I guess my parents really did love me after all.
No kidding. All right, so we'll get into July. You want to take the first news story?
Sure, yeah, right in early July. So the Hyatt Regency walkway collapse takes place at the Hyatt Regency Kansas City Hotel in Missouri, and two walkways, one's directly above the other one, that collapse onto a tea dance being held in the hotel's lobby. And so you got this crushing effect of all these things coming down, and the falling walkways killed 114 people and injured 216. It was the deadliest structural collapse in U.S. history until the collapse of the World Trade Centers 20 years later.
And I used to live in Kansas City, and I remember people talking about when it happened. It was a huge deal. And, that hotel's still there. I've walked through it. So let's get into some music. One rock band that didn't seem to be affected by the ever-changing trends of the early 80s was Foreigner. Coming off the heels of the successful Head Games album, they released 4 on July 2nd and continued their climb. Several singles from the album raced up the charts, including Urgent, Waiting for a Girl Like You, and Jukebox Hero. But it also features several great deep cuts, such as the opener, Nightlife.
Doing
probably know, Foreigner is still around today, albeit with a much different lineup. Guitarist Mick Jones makes occasional appearances, and the band's mostly anchored by former Hurricane singer Kelly Hansen and former Dokken bassist Jeff Pilson.
Yeah, that's pretty wild to think, it wasn't too long before 81 where, like, punk rock was ruling the world, and Foreigner was one of the bands that they lashed out against. Like, the punk rock bands really hated Foreigner, but they survived all that and are still killing it in 81.
Yeah, they were a big radio band at that time.
Yeah.
And while they became known as a syrupy sweet AOR hitmaker later on in 1981, Def Leppard was still part of the new wave of British heavy metal, whether they want to admit to it or not.
Yeah, they were.
High and Dry is released on July 11th. It would be guitarist Pete Willis' swan song with the band, and the first with Robert John Mutt Lang in the producer chair. High and Dry would feature much bigger production than On Through the Night and is loaded with killer tracks such as Mirror Mirror, Let It Go, and Lady Strange. Dry would peak at number 38 in America, but we know that they would shatter that number 2 years later with the release of Pyromania.
Yeah, that's right. Great stuff, that early Def Leppard. I love it.
Yeah, they had a great chemistry in those days, and I know they went definitely more radio friendly in the future. But, those early albums were great.
I love that stuff. So in 1968, the Beatles formed Apple Corps Licensed, formerly known as Apple. So in 1981, a suit was settled with Apple Computers for the payment of $80,000 to Apple Corps, and as a condition of the settlement, Apple Computer agrees to stay out of the music business.
Yeah.
What happened to that?
It changed a few years later with the invention of the iPod.
Yeah, they're all in it now.
They pretty much own music now.
Not necessarily a bad thing because it's all so available to everybody.
Yeah.
And they're, Apple's a little better because at least the artists are getting paid.
Yeah.
So you can support Apple, I think.
So in 1981, the Ramones were in a bit of a free fall. Previous efforts to land a hit had culminated with the lack of success of 1980's End of the Century, an album produced by hitmaker Phil Spector that still failed to break through the barrier of commercial success. While other underground New York peers had broken through, such as Blondie and the Talking Heads, the Ramones couldn't seem to catch a break. Pleasant Dreams is released on July 20th. The album featured a slicker production due to the label bringing in Graham Gouldman from 10cc to produce.
Oh, wow.
They didn't want him, but the label forced it.
They're two very different bands.
Yeah. In my opinion, it's a crime that this album bombed, as it contains some of my favorite Ramones songs, such as Seize the Sensation, We Want the Airwaves, and The KKK Took My Baby Away. don't know the history of the band, it's long been rumored that Joey wrote this song about Johnny stealing his girlfriend, but that's an unconfirmed rumor.
Wow.
But just listen to the lyrics, you'll kind of get it.
That's harsh. Well, on July 16th, the music world lost a great storyteller. Harry Chapin, the singer-songwriter with such hits as Cats in the Cradle and Taxi, died in an auto accident on Long Island Expressway. There's multiple theories about what happened, but many think he suffered a heart attack while driving. He went out like the Macho Man.
Yeah.
Slowed down and got in the center lane before drifting back in front of a semi, and the truck couldn't stop in time and plowed into his car, causing it to burst into flames. Attempts to revive him at the hospital were unsuccessful.
One band that shouldn't be a mystery to KISS fans or Decibel Geek listeners is New England.
Oh, yeah.
As you've heard on this show from drummer Hirsch Gardner, the band's debut album was produced by Paul Stanley, and they opened for KISS on parts of the Dynasty tour. What you may not know is that they released an album in 1981. Walking Wild came out in July. Produced by Todd Rundgren, the album is loaded with ELO and Beatles-influenced rockers, including Holdin' Out on Me.
Free-spirited, riding on the wind. Hawk, soaring to heights no other can reach. Now, for the man who reaches higher, we've captured that high-flying feeling in a new man's fragrance. Hawk, challenging, exhilarating. Now, for the man who reaches higher, Hawk.
It's new AT-AT, the all-terrain armored transport from Kenner. Batteries not included, action figures each sold separately. You can make AT-AT walk. Its legs are big enough to crush obstacles. You can move AT-AT's head and pretend to scan for rebels. AT-AT has a cockpit for Imperial Commander and AT-AT driver and laser machine guns. When you push a button to fire the laser cannons, you activate battle lights and sounds. There's even a troop compartment. New AT-AT from Kenner's Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back collection.
Here come the Duke, Luke, and Bo. This is Daisy, and away they go. From the Dukes of Hazzard collection.
Help!
You can pretend she's stuck up in a tree. Luke and Bo gotta set her free.
We're coming.
Up goes Bo with a boost, and down comes Daisy from her roost.
All's well? That ends well.
From the Dukes of Hazzard collection, Luke, Bo, and Daisy, each sold separately by Mego.
Jesse is a friend. Yeah, I know he's been a good friend of mine.
Ah, jeez. What is this? This is awful.
In 1981, all the girls were crazy about Richard Louis Springthorpe, better known as Rick Springfield. He was a dual threat as a popular actor on General Hospital as well as hitting the charts in 1981 with this song, Jesse's Girl. Rick did more acting over the next few years, but to this day remains a popular draw on the touring circuit. If you're into MILFs, attend one of his shows.
Yeah, totally. That's wild. I mean, who would thought that guy'd still be around after all these years? But
he packs places.
And he does. Yeah. And he was popular as hell then. He's popular as hell now.
Yeah, Billy Hardaway, that one's for you.
All right, so, as we creep closer to the end of the year now, because we're in the second half, we got to break off and talk about things, so Christmas is coming up. People are starting to think about Christmas shopping. So what are some of the biggest toys in 1981? Well, the arcade games, Donkey Kong, the Galaga, the Frogger, the little handheld ones. That's a big thing in 1981. There was Western Barbie was a big seller, and Sport and Shave Ken. This was pretty interesting. It come with a little marker so a little girl could draw a little stubble on Ken, and then you use like a sponge razor, it would take it off.
You know too much about
I saw it in a commercial when I was looking up stuff.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Right along those lines, My Pretty Pony was the big thing. Do you remember the Munchie cheese?
Munchie cheese, yeah.
Munchie cheese up in the trees.
Yeah, I had a friend that had like a Brillo pad haircut, and he used to say he looked like a Munchie. So.
Way up in the trees. Dukes of Hazzard figures in the General Lee.
Yes.
That sounds like a
I
lot
had a
of
Dukes
fun.
of Hazzard banjo.
Nice.
Yeah, very
Nice.
redneck.
Matchbox sets are a big thing in 1981. The Mattel Mastercaster, that's the one that had the little wax things, and you could make your own little Hot Wheels cars. The Clash of the Titan figures are a big thing because that was a big movie of the time. The Jaws game. The Jaws, remember? It's a plastic. It's like a board, like a board game, I guess, but it's plastic. It's got Jaws on it. That was a big seller in 1981. The other big thing in 1981, this was about the hugest thing out there, especially for girls, was Strawberry Shortcake. Mm-hmm. That was massive.
Yeah,
like it was everywhere.
Began my love affair with redheads back then.
Didn't they smell? Like each
They
one
did.
had its own smell.
I mean,
to it?
I heard they did. I don't know.
Well, here's something we definitely know a lot more about, and that's the 1981 Empire Strikes Back action figures and accessories.
Yeah, it's not a doll; it's an action figure.
You damn right, it's an action figure. So those were the big toys of 1981.
That brings back memories.
Shoot, yeah.
Not the strawberry shortcake.
Or the Sport and Shave Ken.
So we're into August, and on Saturday, August 1st, at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time, MTV launched with the words "Ladies and Gentlemen, Rock and Roll," spoken by John Lack and played over footage of the first space shuttle launch countdown of Columbia.
Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll.
And the music world would be changed forever, or for the next 15 years, and then it would totally go to shit.
Right.
Yeah.
MTV becomes so important.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Also in 81 in August, the Violent Femmes are discovered by members of the Pretenders busking outside of a Milwaukee venue, and they are invited in to play a 10-minute acoustic set as a second opening act at the Pretenders show that night. Isn't that the dream?
That's an amazing way to get discovered.
You know, you're playing outside of a bar somewhere. You're just out there playing for change, and then the band comes through and goes, "How would you guys like to come up on stage with us?"
That's wild.
That's good old Wisconsin ingenuity right
Yeah.
there. I like that. Love the Violent Femmes. It's the weirdest band I love.
Yep. And August of 81 sees the release of a great album from a project featuring two powerhouses of 70s rock. Brad Whitford of Aerosmith and Derek St. Holmes of the Ted Nugent Band put together one of the most solid releases of this time period.
Every morning when you walk by my window, every word you know you say is true. And every evening when you walk by my doorstep, I think of words I want to say to you. Oh, I get this feeling deep inside my heart. I've had this feeling from the very start. You got me flipping like some poor dumb schoolboy. Your very presence fills me up with joy. Maybe it's not the way you say you love me. It's in the things you do to make my dreams come true. Yeah. You don't ever have to worry. Every single word is true. I do love you. Yeah.
Sadly, Whitford St. Holmes did not get the success it needed to sustain itself, and Brad would return to Aerosmith and Derek to Ted Nugent down the line. You can hear a great second album of their reunion release in 2016.
Yeah, that was cool. I was really excited when they got back together for that, because this is kind of a forgotten album from 81
Very
because it's good. You know, it's definitely worth revisiting. Definitely.
For sure.
So on August 24th in 1981, Mark David Chapman is sentenced to 20 years to life for the murder of John Lennon, a founding member of the Beatles, one of the most successful bands in the history of pop music. Chapman initially entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. However, he later decided to drop the insanity defense and plead guilty to second-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing, Chapman read from The Catcher in the Rye. That's weird.
That's the book that kind of inspired him to do the murder.
That's weird. All his requests for parole have been denied, and he continues to serve time at New York's Attica State Prison. I got to think, if he is ever let out, some crazy Beatles fan will kill him.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And that's probably the reason why they keep him locked up.
Yeah. So going to September, and after having canceled gigs due to his inability and at times lack of desire to perform, which had resulted from cocaine and amphetamine abuse and heavy drinking, Iron Maiden fires singer Paul Di'Anno. They decided that to progress, they would have to find a singer capable of withstanding the rigors of being on tour. They found that replacement in former Samson frontman Bruce Dickinson. Di'Anno's last show with the band was on September 10th at the Oddfellows Mansion in Copenhagen, Denmark. Bruce would be announced as the new singer on September 26th.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit last week. It wasn't that Paul Di'Anno was a sucky singer, and it wasn't that he wasn't a great frontman or he wasn't a good fit for Iron Maiden. But as we said, after that first big tour they went on where it was like all those days in a row, for all of that whole time, and he just cracked. He just couldn't take it. It's pills to get up, pills to go to sleep. And then it's your lifestyle. It takes something special.
You got to be wired for it
to go on the road like that and stay on the road for so long and be gone.
Yeah, and last I heard, Paul Di'Anno's not doing well health-wise. Yeah. So it's hopefully.
So Iron Maiden finds the lead singer from Samson, says, "Ditch all the white spandex. You're coming with us."
Yeah, exactly. So Rush wasn't the only Canadian act lighting things up in '81. Triumph released Allied Forces on September 19th. The album would reach number 23 on the Billboard pop charts, aided by the singles Magic Power and Fight the Good Fight. I, however, love the track Fool for Your Love. Triumph's history speaks for itself, and they remain a legendary act of Canadian rock.
Shoot, yeah. Love that old Triumph stuff. That's cool. All right, I finally get a turn. So Grand Funk officially split up in 1976, with Mark Farner going solo and the rest of the band changing their name to Flint. By their breakup in 76, they had released 11 studio albums, which all charted in the U.S., with 7 of those cracking the top 10. 19 charting singles, including 2 number-1 hit singles, The Locomotion, and of course, We're an American Band. People forget just how important this band was in the U.S. in the 70s, so comparatively, it's no surprise that by 1981, after finding limited success on their own, it's time to reunite the powers of Grand Funk Railroad.
What you see
You know, it's kind of a reunion because although founding member Don Brewer is back on the drums, original bass player Mel Schatcher opts out of the reunion. Famous record executive Irving Azoff puts it all together on his Full Moons record label, and the result is 1981's Grand Funk Lives. It's too late for Grand Funk, though. It's the lowest charting Grand Funk album up to that point. It reaches 149 in the U.S., and it will be the last charting album the band ever releases.
I had no idea they put an album out in 81. That tells you how little I knew about it.
Neither did anybody else. But that's tough, because like I said, so big in the 70s, and then by 81, it's just, again, this is another band that is not going to survive the MTV era.
Yeah, for sure. I'll tell you what, an absolutely killer rock album would be released in September of 81. The Michael Schenker Group would wow fans with the MSG album. Produced by Ron Nevison and featuring a personnel of Gary Barden on vocals, Schenker on guitar, Paul Raymond on keys, Chris Glenn on bass, and Cozy Powell on drums, it's pretty obvious you're going to have a great audio result. While this album is regarded as MSG's finest hour by many fans, the album went seriously over budget while being made and financially crippled the band for years to come.
Wow, that's wild. Again, that's another one of them bands, tough times.
Yep.
Here's one. This is an up-and-coming story. I like this one. This is a band that forms in the late 70s, but after a few member and name changes, Kix would emerge as a blue-collar East Coast answer to what's starting to happen on the LA Sunset Strip. They gain a huge following in and around Baltimore, and they do it the old-fashioned way by playing a lot of shows and establishing themselves as a must-see up-and-coming act in the area. It's this reputation and a rabid fan base that gets them the attention of Atlantic Records, who would hook them up with famed Sabbath sound engineer Tom Allom, who had just begun his producing career by working with Judas Priest and Def Leppard. The result is the 1981 self-titled debut album by Kix. Now, the album doesn't chart anywhere or sell very well, but it lays a great foundation for a long career. After the album is released, Kix goes out on the road and plays non-stop for over a year, continuing to grow their reputation as an extremely talented band with high-energy live shows.
Yeah, they're one of the best live bands you'll ever see.
Heck yeah, still to this day.
Yeah, we just saw them, 2 years ago, and they were pretty much the highlight of the whole festival.
Yeah, they were awesome.
All right, well, the early 80s were a strange and dark time for Alice Cooper. Plagued with relapsing on alcohol and adding cocaine to his diet, Alice was living in a Twilight Zone existence. His music of the era reflected that. The blackout era for Alice Cooper was in full swing by 1981, and it yielded some interesting results. Special Forces, produced by Richard Potilar, who had worked with Three Dog Night, is a chaotic, strange masterpiece that has Alex mixing punk, new wave, horror, and militaristic contrasts.
So weird.
In hindsight, it's a miracle he lived through the era.
Watching MTV Music Television, the world's first stereo video music channel. But if you're not listening to MTV in stereo, you're only getting half the picture. To get the full sound potential, call your local cable company for a stereo hookup into your FM receiver. Why settle for only half the sound picture when you can have it all? MTV Music Television in stereo.
In our commercial for the new motion picture comedy Porky's, we can only show you the outside of Porky's, because what happens inside is not to be believed. We can only show you this much of the locker room scene, this much of the cabin scene. But we can tell you, when you see Porky's, you'll be seeing the funniest movie about growing up ever made. Porky's. You too will be back for a second look. Rated R. Starts Friday, March 19th at a selected theater near you.
Weekend Columbia Pictures takes you beyond the stratosphere with special midnight showings of heavy metal. Heavy metal. Rated R. This weekend, check newspapers for a midnight metal theater near you.
Oh, boy, what is going on?
You know, I picked these break return songs just because I know what reaction I'm going to get out of you. The 80s became a decade marked by numerous hits that came from movie soundtracks.
Oh, yeah.
One of the most popular was this one, Arthur's Theme by Christopher Cross. The song would reach number 1 in October of 1981, and it would stay there for 3 weeks. It would also be Christopher Cross's last big hit after success with songs such as Sailing and Ride Like the Wind.
Oh, boy.
I did love Arthur,
Christopher Cross.
Yeah.
That is something, though. You know, you think of 81, and that's starting to take off throughout the 80s. You know, music soundtracks would be so huge.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you're going to talk about soundtracks, you got to talk about the movies that go with them. So you ready to find out the top 10 movies in 1981?
Let's do it.
All right. So at number 10, one of my favorites from being young when VCRs finally came out, Time Bandits.
Such a weird movie.
It is a weird movie, but I loved it when I was young. That's very cool. Mm-hmm. At number 9, The Four Seasons. Is that about the band?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Not sure.
And number 8, For Your Eyes Only. That's got to be James Bond, right?
Yes,
I
for
love
sure.
that stuff. Number 7, Chariots of Fire.
That's a famous soundtrack on that, too.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah.
Dun,
That's
dun, 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 dun.
no more singing.
Oh, come on.
And number 6, here's a movie that everyone should love. The Cannonball Run.
Bridget Bardot in a jumpsuit.
I almost, you put that movie, if I had to put a list of like my top 10 favorite movies of all time, I'd have a hard time not putting that one in the top 10. I love The Cannonball Run so much. All those movies.
Mm-hmm.
At number 5, man, there were some great movies in 81. Number 5, it's Stripes.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Oh, I love that movie. Bill Murray, kick ass. Number 4, we talked about the song. Here's the movie, Arthur.
Yeah, hilarious movie.
I always like the comparisons to Ace Frehley back in the day to Arthur.
It's pretty dead on.
Yeah. Number 3, kind of like nowadays, the superhero movies are big. None bigger than Superman Part 2.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 movie of 1981, On Golden Pond. Wake up. The number 1 movie in America in 1981 is Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, yeah, that's better.
That's much better. I love that. Other notable films released in 1981, An American Werewolf in London. That's an awesome movie. I love that. The Evil Dead, Shoot Yeah, Clash of the Titans. Like I said, they had action figures and everything. Dragon Slayer. That's a good one. Escape from New York.
That's a great one.
Oh, I love that stuff. Excalibur. Friday the 13th, Part 2, which is the first appearance of Jason.
Yep.
The Incredible Shrinking Woman.
The movie freaked me out as a kid.
Yeah?
Yeah.
This is a movie I had to wait till I was older to watch, but boy, was it worth it. Porky's.
Yeah, a classic.
Taps. What's Taps?
Taps the one with Tom Cruise and Sean Penn. It's like in a military academy, and the students like take over the academy, and they basically hold themselves hostage.
Huh.
You haven't seen Taps?
I don't think so.
Oh, you need to watch it. It's
check
great.
that
It's a great
out.
movie.
All right, also released in 81 was Halloween 2. And maybe, I don't know, this is another one I'd always have to put up there because I always loved this one growing up, the movie Heavy Metal.
Yeah.
Talk about an awesome soundtrack.
Well, and also as a kid, you could see animated bare tits.
That's right. How awesome was that?
Yeah.
And if you haven't watched this movie in a long time, go ahead and watch it because there's a lot of stuff like you might not have picked up in this movie when you were younger that you would totally appreciate now as an adult.
It's pretty cool.
And the Don Felder tune on that, Felder tune on the soundtrack, Heavy Metal. And there's another song, he does 2 songs on there, I think. And the other song is All of Me or something like that.
I can't remember.
It's really good too.
Yeah.
And maybe Sammy Hagar's Finest Hour.
Okay.
I like that song.
Yeah, I'll take the solo
As
stuff.
far as Sammy Hagar standards go, I think it's a pretty damn good song.
Sure. All right, so we're into October. This is an interesting story. On October 9th, when a then unknown Prince opened up for the Rolling Stones on the first of 2 nights in L.A. in 81, the crowd threw beer cans at him and booed him off the stage within the first 20 minutes of his set.
Wow.
He came on the stage wearing nothing but bikini briefs and a trench coat.
That'll do it.
He certainly got attention.
Fucking Prince, man. Bikini briefs and a trench coat. What a guy.
Well, he certainly put himself
I don't
out
understand
there.
why they're throwing beer cans at me. Let me rip this guitar solo.
Yeah, just play your guitar.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the new wave of British heavy metal on this episode, part 1 and part 2, but not all the UK metal bands are invading America in 1981. So while Maiden and Priest, which I've been told Priest are, kind of part of, kind of not part of the new wave of British heavy metal, but while those guys are dominating in the US, somehow Saxon manages to miss the wave. While being virtually unknown in the States, in the UK, they are just as, if not more popular than all their top European metal contemporaries. They released 2 albums in 1980, which reached number 5 and number 11 respectively on the UK album charts. And while they're top of the pops in England, they're not even scratching the top 200 in the U.S. And it's too bad because a lot of the world is missing out while Saxon is releasing some of the greatest metal albums of all time. And 1981's Denim and Leather is no exception.
Wearing denim, wearing leather.
After reading further into this, I've come to the conclusion as to why Saxon fell short on a world stage compared to other European metal bands, even though they had early 80s U.S. exposure opening for AC/DC and Rush. So check this out. Judas Priest, Columbia Records. Iron Maiden, EMI. Def Leppard and Motorhead, Mercury. Saxon, Carrere Records.
Well, they were like just a British label. I mean, although
French.
Is it French?
They were
yeah,
French. Yeah,
but they housed a lot of those new wave of British heavy metal bands,
but not so
the
much in the U.S.
Yeah.
So all the ones, the Maiden, the Priest, the Def Leppard, the Motorhead, they're all doing good, but they're on these good American labels.
That's true.
So while these guys are, but again, they're killing it in the UK.
Yeah,
they are. I mean, they're going to come up again. Before this show is through, I'm going to prove just how huge Saxon actually is in 1981.
Cool. So on October 27th, this is an interesting story. Home taping is killing music. A slogan of a 1980s anti-copyright infringement propaganda campaign by the British Phonographic Industry, or BPI, a British music industry trade group. With the rise in cassette recorder popularity, the BPI feared that the ability of private citizens to record music from the radio onto cassettes would cause a decline in record sales. Does this sound familiar?
Yeah.
The logo, consisting of a Jolly Roger formed from the silhouette of a compact cassette, also included the words, "and it's illegal."
Yeah, so, this is the beginning of the fear of piracy. Yeah. Yep. It's the first Napster cassette tapes.
Yeah, all the way back in 81.
But you know what? As a little kid, I totally did that.
Oh, totally.
You know, I would listen to the top 40 on, Casey Kasem top 40, and I would sit with my fingers on the record and the play button because you had to push them both at the same time and wait and be like, all right, they're going to play some cool rock. And they'd be like, oh, no, not that song. And then you'd listen to it, you'd wait for the next one. Or you'd say, up next, we're going to play the new song by Motley Crue. And you'd be like, oh, yeah, get your fingers ready, And you listen for your favorite bands, and then you can make yourself little mixtapes. But it was never as good as the real thing because you always had the DJ talking over it, much like we do here. So nobody steals our clips, Right. And of course, even nowadays, the songs we play on the podcast, we intentionally talk over them a little bit, even if we do full songs, because the entire idea of this podcast, and we hope you guys, like even today, go back and look at 1981 and say, wow, I'm going to go buy some of this music, because that's really what the Decibel Geek has always been about. We just want to turn you guys on to awesome music, and we want you to go buy it. Buy it, buy it. No matter where you get it, just go buy it. Keep rock and roll alive.
For sure.
Here's something else for you. In the early 80s, Black Sabbath is enjoying a refreshing resurgence with their brand new lead singer, Ronnie James Dio. Their previous year's release, Heaven and Hell, their first with Dio, is the band's most successful release since 1975. Now, although they're enjoying renewed success, things are far from perfect, as longtime drummer Bill Ward quits the band after the Blue Oyster Cult co-headlined Black and Blue tour and is replaced by Vinny Appice. Believing that he is the reason for Sabbath's refound success, Dio is offered a solo contract by Warner Brothers, while he's still a member of the band. And Warner Brothers still represents Sabbath.
Wow.
And drugs. Lots and lots of drugs. Despite all this, they're still able to create the 1981 masterpiece, Mob Rules. This album's a little quicker, a little more up-tempo than most Sabbath albums, but producer Martin Birch had just finished working with Iron Maiden on Killers, so that would probably explain a little something about that.
Yeah.
This would be the last album in his long partnership with Sabbath, as he would afterwards become Maiden's go-to guy. Sabbath would spend the next year and a half on the road supporting the album before Dio would take Warner Brothers up on their offer and take Vinny with him. Amazing metal album cover for sure.
Yeah, and the title track is just it's one of the best things
so
the band ever wrote. In my opinion.
Totally.
Yeah, I love it.
Got big plans for Dio fans next week.
Yes, we do.
You guys will enjoy that a lot. Stick around for it. Speaking of Black Sabbath, it's time to check in with their former lead vocalists. Now, when we last left our hero, he was biting the head off a dove. Now he's back with his second studio album, Diary of a Madman. The whole team from Blizzard of Oz is back, including producer Max Norman, drummer Lee Kerslake, bass player Bob Daisley, and of course the Guitar Magazine's best new talent of 1981, Randy Rhoads. Mm-hmm. This album is a masterclass in 80s metal guitar wizardry, and it cements the legend of Randy Rhoads that will live on way longer than he does. This album has it all and is, in my opinion, one of those rare, perfect albums without a bad song on the entire thing. Daisley and Kerslake, still a little pissed over becoming known as Ozzy's backing band instead of being in a band with Ozzy called Blizzard of Oz, feel like they're being shafted by Ozzy's manager/wife, the famous Sharon. And they feel she's not giving them their fair share after they've contributed so much to the writing of the songs, especially Bob Daisley, who claims to have contributed the most in the music and the lyric writing on the first two Ozzy albums out of anybody in the band. He could take the hit to his pride, but not to his wallet. So both he and Lee leave the band before the album's released. In retaliation, any mention of the two musicians or their contributions are scrubbed from the album. Instead, featured in the credits and photos are their replacements, Tommy Aldridge and Rudy Sarzo. After Diary is released, the band is off on a European tour, and if you didn't believe me about the power of Saxon in the UK in 1981, Ozzy opens for them in England.
Wow.
Yeah. They play a handful of gigs, and then Ozzy Osbourne has a big old mental breakdown that makes the band cancel the rest of the European leg of the tour. They pull it together for the legendary Diary of a Madman US tour, where things get really crazy. But that's a tale for another year in review.
Yeah, for sure.
Here we go, the moment that a lot of us have been waiting for. Here, let me set the table for you.
The table.
In the table with a candle on it and the weird chairs around it. In 1978, while Kiss is working on Dynasty, the Bee Gees are the biggest band in the world. While they're in the studio creating Unmask, Blondie's Heart of Glass is the #1 song in the world. So the band that was known for doing their own thing against all odds, proud to be who they were almost to a fault, had begun to try to follow the lead of more popular bands. So I'm sure that the Kiss fans were very excited to hear the news that instead of following more trends, the new album would be, and I quote, hard and heavy from start to finish, straight on rock that will knock your socks off. I mean, what a great way to debut on album their new heavy-hitting drummer, the Fox, Eric Carr. And after seeing the success of what former opening acts like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden were finding, a hard and heavy new album for 1981 was a no-brainer. So they go to Ace's home studio and come up with some demos, but they don't feel great about the songs. The feeling is that in order to recapture the magic of Destroyer, they would need Bob Ezrin. Well, guess what? Bob Ezrin's available. And also on a lot of drugs. And he pitches an idea that will win over all the longtime Kiss critics and show the world that this band should be viewed as a respected, intellectual, musical genius. What Kiss needs is a concept album. So, is it a coincidence that The Wall by Pink Floyd is the biggest album on the planet at the time of the recording of The Elder?
I'm sure it's a total coincidence.
Hard and heavy all the way through, start to finish. Rock your socks off. And in the news, actress Natalie Wood drowns after apparently falling overboard during a sailing excursion with her husband, Robert Wagner, and actor Christopher Walken. Mystery has surrounded her death for years, with there being claims of both Walken and Wagner being responsible, despite it being ruled an accident.
Yeah, there's a lot of intrigue around that.
Yeah, that's weird, because all three of those big stars out on the boat by themselves. Who the hell knows what happened?
It's a crazy story.
All right, so here's one that when we decided we were going to do 1981 that I was really excited to talk about because this is absolutely one of my all-time favorite albums. Now, it didn't take long for the new kings of the LA Sunset Strip to have the songs for their first album. Motley Crue had come together with Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, Mick Mars, and Vince Neil less than a year before they found themselves at Hit City Studios West in L.A., self-producing their debut album, Too Fast for Love. This was done because their rabid local fan base demanded it. Even without major label support, they sell over 20,000 copies. The early influences the band shine through on this debut, bands like Cheap Trick, Queen, Aerosmith, and even the Sex Pistols. It's another perfect album without a bad song out of the entire bunch. You just can't deny the youthful energy of songs like Starry Eyes, On With The Show, Too Fast for Love, Take Me to the Top, Piece of Your Action, and Live Wire. Man, listening to this album will always make me feel young. It's the success of their self-titled self-release that will spark a bidding war between record companies who want to sign the band. Elektra will eventually win their services. They bring in Roy Thomas Baker to rework the album for mass release, but it isn't an instant success, but they're on the cusp of leading a rock and roll revolution emanating from Hollywood, California.
Yep.
That's the beginning right there, I think.
And the original album was mixed by Overload.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Overload.
We're going to call him that from now on. Michael Wagner.
Love it.
All right, so this is a big story. On November 30th, porn star John Holmes is arrested on fugitive charges, charged with the Laurel Canyon murders on December 9th. 4 unsolved murders that occurred in Los Angeles. They happened in July. It is assumed that 5 people were targeted to be killed in the known drug house of the Wonderland Gang, 3 of whom were present. All 3 of them, Ron Launius, Billy DeVerrell, and Joy Miller, along with accomplice Barbara Richardson, die from extensive blood force trauma injuries.
Crazy.
Only Launius' wife Susan survived the attack, allegedly masterminded by organized crime figure and nightclub owner Eddie Nash. He owned the Starwood, where Van Halen broke out. He, his henchman, Gregory Dials, and porn star John Holmes were at various times arrested, tried, and acquitted for their involvement in the murders. A lot of people think there was a lot of money involved in that. LAPD detectives were on record saying the crime scene was bloodier and more gruesome than that of the Tate LaBianca murders from the Manson clan.
Wow, that's high standard to top.
The backstory of this goes back to June. On June 29th, 1981, Launius, DeVerrell, Lind, and McCourt committed a brutal home invasion and armed robbery at Eddie Nash's home, resulting in Nash's bodyguard, Gregory DeWitt Dials, being shot and injured. Nash suspected that John Holmes had been involved, as he had been at his house 3 times on the morning of the attack to leave the sliding door open.
Oh, wow.
Nash sent Dials to retrieve Holmes for questioning. Dials supposedly spotted Holmes walking around Hollywood wearing one of Nash's rings and brought him back. Scott Thorson, Liberace's former bodyguard who was in Nash's house to buy drugs, claimed he witnessed Holmes being tied to a chair and repeatedly punched until he revealed the assailants' names.
Golly.
So, and if that story from that robbery sounds familiar to you, it was played out in the movie Boogie Nights.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's exactly where that came from.
Wow. What a waste of such a glorious schlong.
Yeah, no shit. John Holmes was a mess. And if you want to see a cool Boogie Nights...
Porno?
No. Boogie Nights is more of like a... It's like an offshoot takeoff of it, but if more of a direct dramatization of it is there's a movie called Wonderland that Val Kilmer plays John Holmes in.
Oh,
it
wow.
bombed terribly,
Yeah.
but it's a really interesting shot. Val Kilmer does a good job.
So it's the more realistic
Yeah.
version of what really happened?
Yeah, and if it's accurate, John Holmes is a real fuck up. Right?
Yeah,
Just
that's
not
what I
not a
always heard
reliable
about
guy.
that.
At
Well,
all.
I mean, he was a big porn star.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I've got this.
Get famous for a big dick.
I've got this.
Yeah.
What more do I need?
But like he just mooched drugs off people and basically just was a pain in the ass for everybody around him.
But what a glorious schlong.
Yeah.
So I guess this is my last one for 1981, and what a way to go out. You know, this is the story, and we've talked about it so many times.
Mm-hmm.
When you've got that huge hit album, you know, it's hard to come back from that.
Yeah.
You know, AC/DC is in that exact situation because, as we all know, they're coming off of Back in Black.
Yeah, one of the
which
biggest
is
albums in history.
in all of history.
All genres.
That's a hell of a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
You know, and then all of a sudden the record company's going, all right, you know, we're ready for Back in Black 2. Get to it, you know, let's go. And they're like, well, damn, you know, where do we even begin to think about trying to top this massive phenomenon of an album?
Mm-hmm.
So they're back in there with John Mutt Lange. But what they say about Mutt Lange is like he's real slow and methodical about things. And they never really feel like they quite put everything they had into it. Like the whole thing was kind of rushed.
Yeah.
And I think in the music it kind of shows because it's definitely not as strong as previous AC/DC albums, although there are some pretty kick-ass tunes on it nonetheless. You know, you wouldn't think so because you think, okay, Back in Black is AC/DC's number one album, but AC/DC's Back in Black never went to number one on the U.S. album chart. Actually, For Those About to Rock is AC/DC's first number one U.S. album. Even though generally, because that's the way it comes. Off the huge album, the hype, and then, of course, the next album's going to do pretty good. And then it's a matter of whether people love it or not. Right. You know, that's kind of like so many bands we've talked about over the years. Skid Row's a perfect example of that. The hype off the first album makes Slave to the Grind so huge, but Slave to the Grind is so damn good that it's got that staying power with it.
Gotcha.
Where this one, you know, it's the carrying over of the fans from that huge album that everybody buys the new one. Half of them love it and stay on. The other half go, eh.
Yeah. Well, and your song pick, I got to wonder if John Holmes was inspiring for that song pick.
Quite possibly.
Yeah. I always thought
Quite
that song would
possibly.
be great for a Viagra commercial. It just makes too much sense.
Yeah, it does. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah. How could you afford that song, though? So let's go over some of the births and deaths of 1981. And you put this list together, and I thought you went an interesting route with the births. We usually talk about celebrities.
Yeah, because it's 1981, so I think what I've realized by looking at this, because normally we do the births and we talk about people that were born in 1981. Right. You look at the list from 1981, and it's massive.
Yeah.
There's just more famous people now.
Right.
So it's too much to list. So let's talk about the births of some of the greatest bands coming out at this time.
Okay.
So 1981 is the birth of Tesla. Mm-hmm. That's good news. Mm-hmm. The Killer Dwarfs. I'm down with that. Rough Cut is born in 1981. Steeler. That's a great one. Our good friends Rick Fox. Ron Keel. Black and Blue is born in 1981. Tommy Thayer. It's Honeymoon Suite. You know, the Canadians they'd be mad if we didn't mention that. Icon is born in 1981. The Butthole Surfers.
Yep.
Merciful Fate. Flotsam and Jetsam. Green Jello. Ministry. The Beastie Boys. Anthrax, Pantera, Slayer, and of course Metallica.
Wow.
All born in 1981.
What a year.
So I guess we talk about deaths. There's some pretty big ones. We talked about Natalie Wood, the boxer Joe Louis. But I think, we got to talk Bill Haley. Bill Haley in the Comets. He was
first rock and roll star.
That's right. And I think the biggest death is from 1981 is clearly Bob Marley.
Yeah. Taken way too soon.
Yeah.
And, died right in his prime. And it was cancer, right?
Yeah.
And you got to mention Bob Marley when it comes to 1981.
Yeah, because that was a huge, big thing in 1981. And it's a bummer we lost him because who knows, what else he could have done in his career, how much harder he could have rocked.
The way 81 closes out like they do all years, you have the New Year's Rockin' Eve lineup for TV. They always have the Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve. And
so who are the big bands for 81?
This was the 10th annual one on ABC, and appearances by The Four Tops, Rick Springfield, Barry Manilow, Alabama, and Rick James, bitch.
Wow.
So I've got the last pick today, and I know any of you that know me personally are probably like, well, when are you going to play Thin Lizzy? Because they put an album out in 1981.
You know us. You know we're going to. I specifically, doing my picks, I was like, I know there's certain bands that Chris is going to want because I went first, so I left the AC/DC. I left the Alice Cooper. I left the Ramones, and I definitely left you Thin Lizzy.
Yeah, those three of my favorite artists. So with Alice Cooper, Thin Lizzy was also going through a difficult time in 81. Heroin abuse had truly taken hold of Phil Lynott and Scott Gorham's lives, and the newer guitarist Snowy White was having a tough time integrating himself into the band's sound. However, even with all this turmoil, Thin Lizzy, with the recent addition of keyboardist Darren Wharton and producer Chris Sangarides, put out an awesome album with Renegade, released on November 15th. This is a bit of a controversial record for the band, with critics and fans being relatively split about their opinions of it. I'll admit that there are a few clunkers on this album, but the good stuff is great. We're going to play out this week with a track that still had some of that old Lizzy magic. This is No One Told Him, and we'll see you next week.
Support the artists. Buy the music.
Hey, listen closely. Listen while I tell you why he loves you and what he misses mostly. It's pointless, it's pretending. He's got a broken heart that needs mending. You didn't tell him you didn't want to see him again. You didn't tell him you didn't want to see him again. He's gone crazy, he's reckless. Without you, baby, he's helpless. It's deadly how you broke him. He's a fool without you, baby. I'm not joking. You didn't tell him you didn't want to see him again. You didn't tell him you didn't want to see him again.